Temple and 42nd Street in New York, which is the New York Public Library, and outside of it there are two lions. You better believe it has been inspired by the African idiom, because those lions are the Sphinx. Wouldn't you think that they put lions outside of the Bronx Zoo and not outside of a library? Except they've been inspired by the African traditions. The lions are the guardian forces of the temples of learning. They've taken your traditions because you haven't tapped into them fully enough. You cannot even articulate them because you're culturally illiterate. So it's not a question of putting something in the schools for the 5- and 6-year-old. It's putting something in the homes for the parents. It's putting something in the studies for the teachers who have to refashion themselves, even those of us with these PhDs and BBDs. You need to tap into a whole nother level of knowledge that is available to you, so that when someone talks about this symbol, and they take you down to Washington, D.C., and you take your little kiddies, and you say, look, Sammy, and look, Mary Jo, look at the monument they built for George Washington. And you don't have the knowledge, critical understanding, or cultural literacy to say, look, Sammy, and look, Mary Jo, at the African monument of resurrection that was refashioned for George Washington, the slave master bastard, founding father. But there's a new ball game. We have the information on the Statue of Liberty. When it first came out, it was a student that gave it to me, and I'm going to run for these next few minutes. There's a student that gave me the information because a black chemist, Jack Felder, had compiled an information sheet with the data and information where you could find it. And when we put our information out there, we need to put at the end of it the documentation source where we can discover this information. And so when he put the documentary data, etc., I followed it up, being a consummate scholar. I grabbed some of the Sons of Africa. We jumped in a couple of cars, went down to the New York City Museum, 106th Street and 5th Avenue, looking for this black Statue of Liberty. The first model was of an image of a black woman holding the broken chains of enslavement with the broken chains of enslavement at her feet. Nobody there knew anything about it. All the people there were blacks, 5 or 6 blacks, and ain't nobody knew nothing. I refused to leave. Black folks got cognitive dissonance. They didn't want to understand, didn't want to do nothing. But when I refused to leave, then they started thinking. And then they said, well, there was a Haitian guard who was there. So they said, go get him. Maybe he knows something. He was there in '86 when they had the celebration. So they go get the Haitian guard. He said, of course, the model for Statue of Liberty is downstairs. I said, can we see it? No, the director has the key locked up. Ain't nobody can see it. So I said, well, is there any other information about the Statue of Liberty? He went off, came back with a book by Marvin Trachtenberg called The Statue of Liberty. And in it, he opened it up and showed the various models of the Statue of Liberty with the chains at the feet. Then the brother Felder said, you can go down to the French Cultural Center. That's further down on 5th Avenue, 83rd Street or 82nd Street and 5th Avenue. I went there, knocked on the door, just got in there just in time. I had called them before and asked them, did they have any information on the Statue of Liberty? And they gave me a large magazine called Liberty, the anniversary edition of the magazine France, and that dealt with the founding of the Statue of Liberty. It had a picture of Edouard René Lefleur de la Boulay, the Frenchman who came up with the idea of the Statue of Liberty. He was a political scientist. He was a French leader. He was a French parliamentarian. He wrote a 3-volume history of the United States, but more important than that, Edouard René Lefleur de la Boulay, who came up with the idea of the Statue of Liberty in 1865, was head of the French Anti-Slave Society. In 1865, people were not interested in immigration into the United States. In fact, the United States in the 1850s, 1860s had established a know-nothing party. They did not want immigrants. They were against immigrants, and the immigrants that they were against were Papists, German and Irish Catholics. There was no prospect of bringing in immigrants from Central, Eastern, and Southern Europe. These were the unwashed masses. 1865 was our period. 1865 is when 500,000 black people, 250,000 of them official Union Army Navy troops, participated in the Civil War, freeing 4 million of their compatriots, and then saving this nation. The question of black folks getting into their history has nothing to, and fighting for their liberty and struggling for what is right, is not the question of disuniting America. It has been our struggle that has kept America united. It has been our struggle that has raised anew the liberties that this nation professes. It has been our struggle that has created the 14th Amendment that became the amendment that the women could use and others could use when they talked about the expansion of liberty in America. America was founded by rich white men with property and power. It was founded on an affirmative action program for rich white men with property and power. From the very beginning of the founding of these colonies, rich white men with property and power were given affirmative action and set-asides. Whole land set aside for them to develop, and whole people set aside to work it for free, including white folks who came as virtual slaves under indentured servitude. There was a set-aside and affirmative action for rich white folks with property and power in the beginning of this nation, and that tradition under the British and under the Dutch was maintained, and when independence was established, The independence was established, and the Constitution put in place in 1787 is a document of affirmative action for rich white folks with property and power. Because we do not have the critical analysis we need, and that's why we need study groups, serious study groups for the adults and for the teachers, we continue to go around talking about there was a 3/5 clause put in the Constitution, and we had 3/5 rights of white folks. You had no rights in the American constitutional frame of reference. Women had no significant rights. The Constitution did not speak to them, and poor men did not have any significant rights in the Constitution. The Constitution speaks to rich white men with property and power. It's there for you to read with your eyes open and to put an analysis to it. 3/5 clause in the affirmative action and a set-aside for the slave owners. A slave owner who had 200 of our peoples enslaved had 3/5 more voting power for them than a normal rich white man. That's democracy. That's oligarchy. But we still posture a position of democracy as part of the founding process. Democracy came as we struggled to widen the American process to include the most deprived and dispossessed of the people in the system. Our struggle has been the heroic struggle. It's an enormous struggle. If you can only tap into it, if you only knew it, the struggle of our people collectively for freedom, justice, we have been the liberating people force in this nation from day one when we arrived. And that Constitution, if you read it again, in two places that mention black folks, is the 3/5 clause, and then they got this question of 1808. 1808 is a set-aside for rich white men with property and power, the Jeffersons and the Washingtons and the Monroes. A set-aside. Instead of ending slavery in 1787, which they could have done if they were lovers of freedom, justice, and equality. Instead of ending the slave trade in 1787, which they could have done if their Declaration of Independence meant anything to them. We hold all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, among these life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. If they really believed that, they could have instituted a constitution that destroyed these things as the French did. But they did not believe it because the nation was founded by rich white men with property and power. They put the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and everything together. So they set aside 20 years for them to continue the slave trade up until 1808. Set-asides for rich white men with property and power become what has been the basis of this nation. And then they beat up on us about affirmative action and set-asides for what we've contributed to America. So you've got to have an analysis. That's what we're saying. And just let me give you this one frame of reference to show how this enormity of material can be processed in a way to make it work for you. And then we'll have the question and answer period. I come up with a formulation which I call pyramid analysis. And I put this available to the committee. The committee wanted it. And that pyramid analysis means that you've got to be able to process the enormity of information about the human experience. Using the pyramid as a model, it allows us to deal with the basic rule and understanding of human life and life on the planet and life in the universe, and that's duality. Duality and polarity is a basic concept that has to be understood. The pyramidal framework gives us a chance to deal with that. One polarity is what I call the thesis. The other polarity is what I call the antithesis. Between the polarities, you have search for truth and knowledge, which relates to duality and polarity. As you deal with the knowledge, breaking it down and analyzing between the polarities, then you synthesize it and you come up with critical thinking. You put a circle around it, it represents systems, external systems. Put a circle inside the pyramid, you deal with internal systems. Dealing with biology, basic simple biology, basic simple life. You have the female principle, the male principle. The interaction between the female principle and male principle produces what? The child. The synthesis becomes the child. In the human development of the human process, you have a duality. 2 hemispheres of the brain, 2 eyes, 2 nostrils, 2 lips, 2 lungs, 2 arms, 2 ovaries, 2 testes. And so that question of duality is in our own existence. Then the question of the brain. The left side of the brain interacts with the right side of the brain, and the synthesis becomes thinking. So a basic understanding of polarity, duality is what we're trying to talk about. When you see the human family, and you don't have to worry about the information base, we stand on science and history. Science and history is on our side. Our secret weapon has arrived, and a secret weapon is books such as this. Dr. Diop's latest work is out, Civilization and Barbarism. Everybody should have that. It's a must. This was a book of a scholar dealing with scholarship, taking on the whole tradition of Western European scholarship, and he won the battle, establishing what? Number one, the African origin of humanity. Number two, millions of years ago. In fact, Dr. Diop says there's only one human race, and it's the African.